Yes. Hi, good afternoon again, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We have a really fun presentation for you now. It's not as super technical as all the other ones that you've been in. It is Tales from the Field from Kathy Vick. So I'm going to let her hop right in. I'm looking forward to this presentation.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to my presentation. As we've said, this is a little bit less, it's a little bit more lighthearted than some of the other ones. My goal on this is to talk about what it's like managing a remote Azure development team. So I wanted to start off with just a quick slide that it made me laugh. I was looking for some information on working from home and some images that I could use in my presentation, and this popped up, and I thought it was pretty appropriate. This is a lot of what people think when you tell them you work from home. I especially like the last one that says what I really do, because he's got his phone on a landline, he's got his cell phone, his computer. That's really what my day is like. So I just wanted to start off with that. The other thing I'll tell you is I like interactive presentations, but with this system, if you have a question or if you want to make a comment, I can't actually see the comments, so please put the comments in. I'm going to try to pause between slides, and Liz will let me know if there's any questions. And feel free to ask. Listening to me talk for an hour can be boring, so I really like when people ask me questions. That's me up in the corner. Just a little bit about me. I have been at Pragmatic Works for 6 years. Prior to Pragmatic Works, I spent 12 years at Microsoft and 10 years at Boeing, so I've hit the big ones in the Seattle area. I have managed small teams, large teams, multifunction teams, all kinds of different things through my 20-some years of doing this. But I've done the last couple of years, my roles and responsibilities have really switched, and I'm doing a ton of work remote on development teams. So that's sort of how I got into this. And just as a little side note, as you can see, when I'm not working, I love travel and photography. That's me in front of the Ponte Vecchio Bridge in Florence, Italy, one of my favorite spots. So let me talk for a minute about my presentation. I wanted to talk at this conference, but when I was talking to my boss, I said, I manage the team. I don't really do anything, in Azure. I don't really do anything in Azure. But I started thinking about it, and I realized that actually it's because of Azure that I do an awful lot of things. And it's because of the fact that we're working with all these cloud-based tools that I do a lot of things. And what I will tell you is we haven't always been very good at this. This is something that Pragmatic Works, we kind of struggled a little bit when we started doing more and more. In the past, good projects were always run by everybody being in the same building, and you had hardware that you plugged into the wall, and plugging it in the wall gave you connectivity, and you had to be at your computer to get any work done. But now, with our cloud world of data and servers and tools all being available outside of our physical building, you can work anywhere. There's good and there's bad to that. We're going to talk about that. But basically, you can work anywhere. So what I wanted to talk about is what it's taken for us to make that change from you have to be on site to there's no reason to be on site. And let's talk a little bit about what it takes to be very successful in that kind of world. The other thing I'll tell you, that last bullet that I have, is it really is not limited to Azure. This applies to a lot of cloud technologies, but we're doing an Azure Week presentation, so that's why I wanted to do this. So just a little bit about Pragmatic Works. If obviously you know who we are because you're at our conference, but as it relates to my presentation, I wanted to point out that we staff about 30 nationwide consultants. So we have consultants all over the United States. I'm very happy that we finally have 3 of them here on the West Coast. It used to just be me. We have local services in our Jacksonville office. So there are some things that we do on site, but the majority of our people, our salespeople, our consultants, our bosses, are scattered all across the United States. But what's really important is that we work as one team. No matter where you're located physically, we consider ourselves one team. So part of what I'm going to talk about today is how we make that work successfully. We also have quite a few different multi-person projects where the people don't all live in the same place. Not only are they traveling to get to a customer, but even the team doesn't all live in one place. So when you look at some of our teams, we have consultants, contractors, and customers that all live scattered. I'm going to show you in a minute how my project works. And we find ways to make that work. We also have several remote-only engagements. I just was on a call where we wrapped up a remote-only engagement, and I've never met the customer. I haven't even met the consultant, and they've never met us, but it was a very successful engagement. So really, a lot of pragmatic work, we've kind of learned what works and what doesn't work when it comes to making remote engagements successful and remote development teams. I want to talk for a minute about remote versus offshore. We use the term offshore a lot. A lot of times you'll hear about offshore development. It's become a very common practice to use teams that are located overseas. And overseas to me means anywhere outside the United States for lower price development. So you'll hear people talk about offshore development. When I was putting this presentation together, it occurred to me that everything I'm doing applies to offshore, but I was really focused on the idea of an onshore team that doesn't all sit in the same building. That's really when I'm talking, that's what I'm talking about. But I'll tell you as I go through this, everything that I'm going to tell you about an onshore team applies to the offshore teams as well. And that the other thing is the reason this conversation is happening is because now that we're getting such cloud-based technology, it's becoming more and more normal. We have opportunities to work remote that we didn't used to have. When I first started at Pragmatic Works, and for the 5 years I was in Microsoft Consulting Services, travel was huge. If you were a consultant, you were a road warrior, and you had to go to the customer to work on the customer system. And Pragmatic Works was really cool because they only made us travel every other week. So they were already cracking the door to working remote. But we've had customers over the 5 years say, no, if you're not on site, we won't do it with you. Well, what's happened is that's becoming less and less of an issue. For this last year, my entire year, I've only traveled once or twice, which really bums me out, but it's actually the right thing to do. So as cloud-based technologies become more of the norm, we're seeing a lot more of these opportunities to work geographically dispersed, even if your whole team is in the US. I will say the more time zones you have to cross, the harder it is. I've had a meeting where I had to be up at 5 in the morning to talk to the East Coast at 8 o'clock in the morning, who had to talk to Europe at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And that's painful, but it is doable. So what I like is for the US, you're only crossing 4 time zones and you can make it work. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we make it work. So just a little bit about my current project without naming names. I can tell you that I'm working at a mid-sized company. They have offices all over the United States that are submitting reports that we're treating as data, and we're importing them to accumulate and build some corporate data information, and we're building a corporate data repository. We're using all Azure-based tools. So we're using Azure Data Factory for all of our ETL and file consumption and to sort of orchestrate the whole process. We're using SQL databases, Azure SQL databases, to do our storage. And we are using a VM with SSRS on it to do reporting. Someday we'll get to Power BI, but right now reporting was actually the right tool for us to use because this is a lot of accounting data, and accounting loves rows and columns. So for us, we're actually touching quite a few different pieces of Azure technology to make this project work. The other thing that my customer is doing, and this is for data security reasons, this was an obstacle for them when they first started doing Azure. Even though everything in the cloud is secure and communications to devices are secure, one thing they wanted to be able to do is add another layer of protection for who can get to their data. So they actually have Citrix desktops for us. And if you've never used them, it's basically a virtual machine that I can log into from my laptop wherever I am, as long as I'm on the internet. I can log into this virtual machine, and I am able to access a virtual desktop that is inside of their corporate network. It has their IP address. It has everything I need. so that when I access the Azure portal and any of my cloud resources, I'm coming from within their network. This is a great technology. It's not an Azure technology, but it's an awesome technology. You can do the same thing with Azure VMs. If you have VMs set up for your developers, it's a great way to really control. It's adding a second layer of security into getting to the resources that you need. We're also using a lot of online tools. We have TFS, which is the code repository from Microsoft. We have Team Foundation Server. We have Visual Studio. We have SQL Server Management Studio. And we have the Azure portal that we're using for code development and to manage all of our code assets. So it's all available to us through our Citrix desktop and through cloud resources. I bring that up because I wanted to show you a little bit of how my current project team looks. It's a relatively small team. I'm the one up in the Seattle in the Northwest, so that's me as the team lead. My customer, you'll notice, is down in Florida. I have a customer who's headquartered in Orlando, but they have an IT office down in California. So I'm actually supporting both the California office and the Orlando office. Pragmatic Works is in Jacksonville, and my sales lady for this project is out of Tampa. I have a developer that's in Atlanta, a developer in Virginia, and a developer in New Jersey. And my project manager is in Wisconsin. And to complete the circle, my boss is in Minnesota. So for us, my project team is very geographically dispersed. We're physically in 2 of the 4 time zones, 3 of the 4 time zones, because we have Eastern, Central, and Pacific. We got nobody in Mountain. But we're very, very dispersed. And so finding a way to manage this process to reduce cost and to keep it effective has been my challenge for the last year. So I want to start by talking about some of the challenges of working with a remote team like this. I would say the number one challenge I have with people is getting them to separate home from work. If you work from home, you never leave work. And understanding that leaving work means putting your laptop down and walking away. And I spelled separating wrong, by the way, I just realized that. You want to be sure that you know how to separate your home life from your work life when you're working from home. Otherwise, you never stop. I caught my developer this weekend saying, oh, I'm going to work on it on Saturday. And I'm like, no, I don't want you working on Saturday. Leave work at work. Time zones is a big challenge. As you could see before, I have people in 3 different time zones across 4 hours worth of time. So finding time when I can talk to them and they can talk to me and I can talk to the customer, and making sure, like when they're at lunch is the start of my day, and I don't want to lose that hour of productivity. So dealing with a lot of time zones is a challenge. I'd also say measuring productivity is one of the big challenges. How do I make sure? I can't walk in their office and look at them and see what they're doing. It goes back to that, if you're working from home, are you sleeping in all day? I can't see them. So how do I know they're working? How do I manage that productivity that I need from them in order to make them successful, to make the team successful? Another challenge we face is collaboration. You can't just get up and walk to the next cubicle or look over the cubicle wall and talk to somebody. It's a little bit more of a challenge because you don't know if they're at their desk, and encouraging collaboration can be a limitation, but I think I'm going to show you that there are ways to make it pretty successful. You're going to find people on teams who are very susceptible to wanting personal interaction. They like that personal interaction. And they can become very disconnected if you're not careful when you have this kind of remote team. I've never met the guys that I'm working with, but I've managed to establish a personal interaction with them that I think is important as a part of our team. And I think it makes us successful, which leads to the morale question. You know, when you're in offices, a lot of teams will do a morale event. Oh, we're going to go out for the afternoon. Well, you can't do that when you're running a remote team. So how do you manage morale? I will also say, and this is the reason I picked a graphic for this slide, that languages and accents. We may all speak English, but I'm telling you right now, English is probably the biggest thing I struggle with, because I can say something and it doesn't mean the person on the other end of my conversation, there's no guarantee that they understood what I said. It can be as strong as I've worked with people from the deep south who have a strong accent, people from the far east who have strong accents. I worked on a team in Brazil, and I had to laugh because the guys in Brazil were actually making notes of all of the sentences that I said because I used a lot of slang. You never realize how much slang you use till you work with people who English isn't their first language. And my best moment in Brazil was when I heard the Brazilian guys all talking in Portuguese, and one of them said blah 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 in the middle of one of their sentences, and I bust a gut laughing, and I thought I have impacted that team because they're using my slang in their Portuguese conversation. Anytime you have multiple languages and a lot of people speaking with accents, it can be a real challenge trying to manage that process. And on top of all of that, you still have all the problems you have with any team that you manage. How do you manage a poor performer? How do you manage keeping somebody busy if they're a really good performer? How do you manage interactions? Everything you do with a local team is also a problem in managing a remote team. It's just exaggerated a little bit. So keep in mind, those are the challenges that I think people have working remote. I really want to talk about are some of the fun advantages of having a remote team. I think there are huge advantages. Me personally, I am never going to work in an office again. I love what I do. And probably the number one thing I love about it is no commute time. My commute exists from going upstairs to downstairs, and in the morning I have to feed the cats. So I have like a 5-minute commute to get to my desk in the morning, and I don't even have to be presentable. It's awesome. I think this adds to better work-life balance because I used to spend 2.5 hours a day in the car getting to Microsoft, and that was complete wasted time. I couldn't do anything but drive and maybe call my mom or something like that. There's not a lot you can do when you're in the car. Even if you commute on a train or a bus, Microsoft is really good. They have an entire bus system that you can take so that you can work in your commute. But I'm not a big fan of commuting, and I live far enough out of the city that it's a big deal. So I love the fact that my commute time can be repurposed for better work-life balance. I will say that means I don't get any snow days. Last winter, we had a big snowfall, and everybody got snow days except me. I still had to work, and that was a little bad. But occasionally, I call them either hurricane or tornado days where the power goes out. We just had a hurricane in Florida that impacted our ability to work a little while ago. I could work, but my customer couldn't because they had a hurricane coming through. The beauty of having a remote team is that work can literally happen anywhere there is a reliable internet connection. I have worked from a lot of places around the world while on vacation, which, by the way, is something I don't recommend, but it happens. And as long as I can get on the internet, I can get my work done. I'm taking advantage of that and going to see kids in other states, and I'm working at the hotel, and then I go see them in the evening. So I can work a lot of places, and to me that's just such an awesome thing. Also, that bullet on no travel cost and no office space cost. If you have a remote workforce and you learn how to manage it effectively, not only do you not pay for travel, but you don't pay for an office. Now that means it doesn't mean you get to save all that money because you get to reinvest it in technology that allow you not to have office space. But it's an awesome thing when you can reduce your cost, both in travel or in physically putting people in a building. For my company as consultants, every time we go to a customer, they have to get us a place to sit. And that's been a challenge at a couple of places. So being able to work remote is an awesome experience for saving money for both office space and travel costs. And my last bullet, you can hire people without worrying about where they live. I will tell you right now, I am living proof that SQL folks in Seattle cost more than SQL folks in Jacksonville. And I know that because I'm on a Jacksonville salary. I'm at a fortunate point in my life where I can afford to do that, and I love it. But it's very expensive to live and work in Seattle. I was recently looking at housing prices, and the average house in my county, King County, is almost twice what the average is for Maricopa County in Arizona. My daughter moved there, and we were looking at houses down there, and I was floored at the difference in prices. So if you can get people who can live in a cheaper place, they can and still work for you, even if you live in an expensive place. That's a really, really big advantage. Now you're not limited to the people that can drive to your office. You're just limited by the people who can connect to your office. So to me, those are huge advantages from having a remote workforce that I think a lot of people can take advantage of depending on their scenario. Any questions? I want to make sure. Liz, are we good?
Let me see. One just popped up. Did you face any challenges with such different time zones to arrange a meeting? If yes, how did you resolve?
So yes, we did, and I had to resolve it by getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning, which sucked for me. But sometimes that happens. I've actually taught a class. I had to do a class. I was scheduled for a class to teach at 9 o'clock in the morning Eastern, which meant I had to start teaching at 6 o'clock in the morning Eastern. My salespeople, like I work with a sales lady who lives on the East Coast, but she's responsible for California. She's had quite a few meetings at 7 o'clock at night, so it could be 4 o'clock California time. I'm going to give you some tips in a minute on how to handle time zones. So if I don't answer your question better, ask it again. But basically, what we try to do, we have a couple of tips for dealing with multiple time zones. There are times, though, when one or more members of the team, I'm going to be working with a California office that is dealing with an India team. And so we're having to figure out that the only overlapping hours we have is 7 in the morning until 11 in the morning. So when I go to California to work with this customer, I'm going to be starting my office day at 7 o'clock in the morning. I'm hoping I can start it from the hotel at 7 o'clock in the morning, but I'm most likely going to drive in. I'm going to talk a little bit about even when you have a remote team, sometimes it's nice to be face to face. But I will tell you, for a development team, there's almost no reason to be face to face. So I'm going to answer that question in a little more detail in a minute. So ping me then if I don't get it better answered. I don't want to give it away right now. All right. Anything else, Liz? We good?
We're good.
All right. So these are some of the keys. I got 2 slides here on keys to success, on what I think are incredibly important things if you want to be successful at running a remote team. Absolutely, having strong leadership is critical. I think you can have a weak leader in a face-to-face team, because I think people see it and can react to it a little bit better when they're face-to-face. When you're remote, it's like it's exaggerated. So you have to have a really good, strong leader. You have to have someone that the customer can contact and know who to contact. One of the biggest mistakes we made in the past was putting a team together that was mostly remote and having the customer not understand who they were supposed to call when they had a problem. And it frustrated the customer, it frustrated us. We now understand that we need to speak as one voice. When I have a team, one of the first things I tell my team is we speak with one voice, and that voice is mine. Now, that doesn't mean I don't listen to everybody. I highly value the input from my team. But the customer that I work with, whoever that customer is, whether it's an internal Microsoft team that I used to work with, or now being a consultant, whoever my customer is, I make sure that the customer knows who they can go to when they have a problem. I will deal with my team, and I talk to the team, and we talk all day, every day, and I listen to everything they say. But when we talk to the customer, it's one voice. And that kind of lines up with having a clear chain of command and setting expectations. It's very important for the team leader to really understand what the responsibility is with the customer. How do I escalate when there's a problem, both on the customer side and the internal side? And how do I set expectations that can be met? The key to setting expectations is setting expectations that can be met. One mistake that my company has made recently is the customer set expectations, and because our consultants were working remote, they just assumed they had to meet them. And they were working lots of extra hours trying to meet these unrealistic expectations. That's how not to run a remote team. What you want to do is set expectations that are easily met and have an escalation process for when there's problems. And making all of that work successfully with the customer means having a good, strong leader on the team. I can't stress how important that is. By the way, I'm going to throw this out here when I talk about these things. Every one of these keys to success apply even if you have a local team. But I think it gets exaggerated when you have a remote team, and that's why I'm calling them out. Same thing with strong project management. I've been on a team where the project manager's interaction was, are you done yet? When are you going to be done? What percentage are you done? And that was their interaction. And the problem is they don't see me every day. They have no idea they have no idea if I'm telling them the truth. That's not the kind of project management that helps your team succeed. You need the kind of project management that can realistically discuss somebody's progress and can help them when they fall behind, or help them understand what to do if they're ahead of schedule. I had a project go very bad because the team was ahead of schedule and they picked up a bunch of work because they were ahead of schedule and they didn't tell the project manager, and then things went wrong and the stuff that they were supposed to be doing they didn't do right, and then they got in trouble for things that they did that were extra. So having a project manager who knows what people are doing, who knows how to interact, can help very clearly find deliverables, know when a developer is, stretching the truth on what done means, and help define these deliverables and the timeframes. Probably the most important thing is setting those expectations and limiting scope creep. You really need a good, strong manager, even if they don't have the title of PM. You want project management from your leadership that allows you to really manage these people. And I think it's more important when they're remote, because you don't see them sitting in their office at 7:00 at night when they're sitting at home. And so it's very important on a remote team to really, really manage that team, have good, strong project management that keeps that all clear. The other thing is, my other major keys to success have to do with communication. And I think communication and documentation go hand in hand. But when you have a remote team, it is even more important than when you're local, so that you have, I called it evidence that things happen. We at Pragmatic Work stress very, very strongly on documentation and communications. In fact, we just had a meeting yesterday as a team, our normal consultant status meeting. The subject was, how can we communicate better? And one of the things that came out of that meeting was having a 5-minute daily stand-up call every day is absolutely critical when you're not seeing people day to day. We cannot stress the value of having that touch base every day. I do this in my team. I have a 15-minute meeting. It rarely goes 15 minutes, but we try to keep it to as close to 15 minutes as possible. And, we call it a stand-up, but none of us are standing. It's basically 15 minutes for the team to get together, say good morning, see if there's anything blocking anyone, make sure everybody knows what everybody else is doing so that you don't have multiple people overlapping on each other, identifying resources that we need to share, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of things like that we cover every day in our 15-minute meeting. And it is, even if we have a 5-minute meeting, it is so helpful to start the day or at some point in the day, because it's my start of the day. My guys are 3 hours in when I start my day. So we have our daily stand-up. For me, on the Pacific, it's every morning at 7:00. I have a stand-up with my customer, and every morning at 7:30, I have a stand-up with my team. And doing that allows me to get my day started well. They're already into their day, but it gives us that touch base that I just think is so important to keep everybody on track. And by the way, it's getting dark up here in Seattle at 7:00 in the morning. It's getting harder and harder, but I value that ability to have that touch base so much that I get up early. Also, chat with your team using chat utilities. So chat utilities are things like Skype and Teams and Yammer and all these other utilities that are out there. My team knows that I might ping them at any point in the day. and we talk. If I have a question, I ask him in chat. And I love asking him in chat because it's a way to interrupt, but they can stop, they can finish what they're doing and then look at my question. So rather than just interrupting in the middle, they can, let's say they're writing a line of code, they can finish that line of code or that line of documentation or that test that they're running, and then they can answer my question. To me, that's a great way to communicate because it allows people to do it a little bit more on their timeline. But also doing desktop sharing, doing virtual meetings, all of these things really play into having a team that works together and not a bunch of individuals working. The other thing is I'm not kidding, a law at Pragmatic Works called Kathy's Law because I came up with it. If it ain't written down, it didn't happen. Documentation when you have a remote team, it is even more important than when you have an on-site team because that's the evidence that things happen. So when you have a meeting with 6 guys, especially if you're on the phone, the person who takes notes should write those notes up and send them out to everybody on the team and say, this is what I heard. Did I miss anything? And we do that because not everybody writes the same notes. When you're in the room, they write it on a whiteboard. But when you're not all in the same room, it's a lot harder to have the evidence that happened. And so what we tell all of our consultants is write it down. Up in the strong communication section, you'll notice I have a thing called status reports. I believe very strongly in the idea of using status reports. At Pragmatic Works, we do them every day rather than once a week. And that's hard for people when they first come on board. We have people who struggle with it. But the advantage you have of writing it down every day is it's fresh in your mind. And the advice that I give to every new person at Pragmatic Works is document a key conversation, document a key business decision, and document why we should pay you for all day. And if you kind of keep that in the back of your mind, you're going to write a status report that over time will protect you from people saying, well, I didn't see you do the work because you're remote. They didn't see you do the work. So we use our status reports as a way to encourage our team to document the things that we later down the road, we might need to have some evidence on. We actually were in an engagement. This was not our best engagement ever. And part of the reason we got in trouble with Microsoft was we didn't have some things written down. And we should have had them written down. If people had used their status reports properly, they would have been written down. This is one of my major lessons learned. It was a project I did early on at Pragmatic Works. We had Microsoft tell us, we believe you. We think the customer isn't telling the truth, but you know what? You don't have it written down. And it hurt us. So we put a lot of pressure on our consultants, especially on these remote projects, to write stuff down. So I was talking to Adam Jorgensen, our president of consulting one day, and I said, look, as far as I'm concerned, if it ain't written down, it didn't happen. And he goes, I'm going to use that. And like a month later, I see it show up on our company meeting, and it's become Kathy's Law. But it's really saved us in a lot of circumstances. So I think something I want to really stress is, as a part of strong communications, make sure you're documenting these communications. With a remote team, I think that documentation is it plays a bigger role than when you're all in the same building and you see people and you see what's on the whiteboard and things like that. I just really believe strongly that it's helped us a lot to take the extra time to write stuff down. Let me talk for a minute about, yes, is that you, Liz?
It is. I was just going to say we have a question, and it's a good one, and it affects my team, and I'm sure it affects your team sometimes as well. Do you think a team with some members local and some remote can ever work, or is it just a one-way ticket to alienating the remote workers?
I think if you're not careful, you absolutely can alienate the remote workers. I can tell you that 3 to 4 years ago at Pragmatic Works, I had those conversations with people because there was a lot of consultants that were in the office at that time, and a lot of us that weren't in the office felt like nobody cared. And we've gone through a change at Pragmatic Works because of it. And one of the best things we got is a boss who doesn't live in Jacksonville. all of a sudden our boss is remote. And now we have, and don't get me wrong, I loved our boss that lived in Jacksonville. But one of the things that changed at Pragmatic Works was a better understanding for what it feels like to be remote. If you have a team that is both remote and on site, you have to work a little harder with the people that are off site to make sure they feel like the team. And that I actually have a slide on that coming up too, because that is an issue, and it's a very valid issue. How do you like if one of the things it annoys me every time. I love Brian Knight; he's a great boss, but he'll send a mail out to the team and say, "All right, guys, we're going to take off for the afternoon, and if you're remote, you take off." Well, you know what? We can't, and so we've had to come up with ways as a part of our team so that our Jacksonville team understands, hey, look, we can't take off like you can take off. And so don't tell us this, and don't make us feel like you guys are all partying in Jacksonville when we're all working hard out in the field. So it hasn't been a huge deal, but it has popped up a couple of times. And I will say it is up to the managers of the team to recognize that and make an effort to make everybody feel included. And I'm going to tell you in a minute some ways to do that. So as a leader of a remote team, that's a great lead into what this slide is. As a leader of a remote team, part of what you have to do is pick the right people. If you pick the wrong people and you pick the worst person to pick is a person who might be brilliant, but they need a lot of interaction to be brilliant. They need that constant feedback that they're doing awesome and that you can look over their shoulder and you give them that rah. There's a lot of really smart people who just aren't cut out to work remote. You want to make sure you're picking the right people. Pick some very independent people. My guys are the happiest when I leave them alone. I took 3 days of vacation and they were like, yay, we have 3 days to work. So that's the kind of people you want, is people who really understand working independent and what it means. I will tell you also, a major key to success is defining the requirements well. In an on-site team, if something's not defined, you poke your head in and you say, hey, this isn't really clear what's going on. You draw something on the board, you figure it out. It's a lot harder to do when you have a remote team. So getting those requirements defined ahead of time is really, really important. It's very easy when we're on site to slack off on that. When you have a remote team, I think that's one of those things that gets exaggerated, is when the requirements are bad. And let's say I'm working at 3:00 in the afternoon Pacific, and I can't talk to anybody until tomorrow morning because the whole East Coast has gone home. That's not a good scenario. I need those requirements defined so that when I'm working at 3:00 in the afternoon, or my guys are working at 8:00 in the morning their time, which is 5:00 in the morning my time, I don't need them asking me questions. So it's up to me to make sure that they have good definition so that I'm not getting pinged at 5:00 in the morning. And I say that because that's happened to me. I've now learned to mute my phone so that it doesn't ping me at 5:00 in the morning. Making sure everybody knows their roles and responsibilities is really important. Make sure that everybody knows what they're doing. Don't be shy. Everybody needs to speak up. The worst thing you can do to a remote team is make them feel like they're not heard. And I will tell you that even with Pragmatic Works, it's easy not to be heard. It's easy for people to sit back and say, well, nobody asked me. Well, you know what? You had a chance to speak up. Speak up. That's what you want to encourage. And as a leader, you're going to want to pull people into the conversation if they're nervous about it. A lot of people feel weird. Like I'm talking to my computer right now and people think it's weird, but I've learned how to do it, so I think it's good. Some other quick tips I'll say: place a lot of value in standards. If you have standards, then you have things your team can see so that they can work the same and get things done. Place a high value on things like development standards, documentation standards, et cetera, et cetera. Know how to use your technology. The worst thing in the world is to get a team leader who doesn't know how to mute somebody or screen share. Or the thing I hate the most is to hear, email me that so I can print it out and read it later. That drives me crazy. Make sure that you know what you're doing technology-wise. The other thing, some of this is pretty obvious, like ensure you have good code management. On a remote team, it's even more important because if that laptop dies or that guy quits, they're walking away, and you want to make sure that they're not walking away with corporate assets. So those are what I think a leader needs to do. Let's talk for a minute about team members. So if you haven't seen the video that I have a screenshot from over on the side, I encourage you to go out and do an internet search on your favorite browser for BBC Children Interrupt. This is a video that was actually live on the BBC network. It kind of went viral, where this guy, very professional guy, doing a very professional job, his little 4-year-old walked in the room in the middle of his TV interview. And then right after she came in, the little baby came walking in its little baby walker. And then pretty soon you see the wife come in and grab the kids and drag them out of the room. And this is all going on in the background as he's having this very serious conversation. It's pretty funny, but this happens to those of us who work at home. Right now, my cat is trying to get my attention, and he doesn't quite understand that I'm working. I've been in many meetings where dogs bark or children are crying or something like that. So as a team member, as a remote team member, if you're going to be successful, you want to make sure that you can limit those interruptions. Those kind of things happen in an office too, but I think people take them, they see it differently when they realize you're at home and they can hear the dog barking. So I tell everybody, have a good place to work. One of my developers has his own office. He's got 3 monitors set up. He's got a big giant full-size keyboard. He's well set up to do remote work, and he's taking advantage of the technology, how cheap it is to have at home. Anything you can do to give yourself a good workspace is going to add to your ability to work well on a remote team. Knowing when to start and stop, and being able, I said at the beginning of this, if you work from home, you never leave work. You've got to get a mentality that says, I'm leaving work. And the irony of me saying this is a problem I have. I will start my day. I said I started every day with a meeting at 7 o'clock in the morning. I forget to stop. I'll work. My lunchtime is 3 o'clock in the afternoon Eastern, and I'll forget to stop. And all of a sudden I'll think, oh man, I'm hungry. It's 2 o'clock. Well, at 2 o'clock, the whole East Coast goes home and I get some lunch. But it's real important for you to know as a team member when to start and stop. Don't work 24 hours a day. Don't do that to yourself. As a team member, it's your responsibility to let your team lead know if expectations are causing you to work extra hours. When you're a consultant, those need to be billable hours. Work what you bill what you work is what I tell people. And as a team member on a remote team, that's a big part of my responsibility. Make sure that I'm doing it right. If you were in an office, you would leave the office to go home. And think of it the same way. Make sure you're checking in code and documents often. That's so important, especially if your team is working on their own hardware. It's okay for everybody to work individually, but have that integration environment where people can check things in. That's what you want to encourage your team to do. Don't keep the code in an isolated state. Make sure that the code is in an integrated state. The other thing that I have underlined is support your team members. You asked about if I have a half remote team and a half local team, does the remote team feel abandoned? They don't if they talk to each other. Use technology to stay in touch with your remote team members. Don't treat them like they're remote. Treat them the same as if they were next door. If you make the remote team members feel like they don't have access, then they're going to feel abandoned. So to me, and part of my job is to support the other consultants at Pragmatic Work. So we have in our Teams, Microsoft Teams setup, we have a channel called SOS. If you're having a problem, post it in SOS. That's what we do. And somebody will answer you. I've been online at 5 o'clock in the afternoon Pacific time, and someone on the East Coast has said, I'm really stuck on a problem. I know it's late, but if anybody sees this, can you help me? And I've been able to help them. I've also had the reverse happen, where somebody at 4 o'clock in the morning has a problem, my time, 4 o'clock in the morning, and I can't get to them, but somebody else can. And so being able to use technology to make your team members not feel so isolated is really, really important. Support your team is your responsibility as a team member. Don't isolate yourself, and don't isolate your other team members. So let's talk for a minute about communications, because that is the number one thing that you're going to struggle with a remote team. You don't talk to people. People feel isolated. When you're in the office, you chit chat. Well, you know what? Chit chat a little bit over Teams. Chit chat a little bit over the calls. When I have my calls with my guys every morning, I try really hard not to say something personal. I have one of my developers walks his dog a couple times a day, so I ask about the dog, and I know the dog's name, and stuff like that. Treat them like they're in the next cubicle. That's the easiest way for me to put it. Manage your communications is so critical. If people feel isolated, that's when you start to have problems. One of the things that came out of our team meeting yesterday was Adam Jorgensen telling us, hey, pick up the phone. We forget sometimes that we still can pick up a phone and call people. So I actually moved this bullet up to the top because that is a good reminder. I never think of calling anybody. I always send them a text message. I always chat because I always assume that they're not available to take the call. But you know what? You can still call people. That's a good thing to do. But I will say using Teams, Skype, Yammer, Slack, whatever other utility you want to use is absolutely critical for having a successful remote team. When you start chatting with them all day and talking to them all day over these utilities, it just makes you feel like you're not remote. So I strongly encourage, get to know WebEx, go to meeting. The one thing I will tell you, and I got this feedback from my team, I asked my team why they thought they were successful. And one of the things that I got from them was being reactive. They know that their responsibility is to be reactive. That does not imply that they're sitting at their desk 24 hours a day. But they do know that if I send them a Teams message, I want an answer within about 10 minutes. I'll talk about that in a minute. But make sure that people understand how to deal with how to be reactive, how to text people, how to use chat, and how to be reactive. So learn to use the tools to manage your communications, because you can't walk next door and just ask them. Does that make sense? Are we good? Anything, Liz?
Nope, we're good. Everybody's just saying you're making good points.
Good. Happy. I wanted to talk about video for a minute. You'll notice I'm not using it. Part of the reason I'm not using it is because I worry about bandwidth, and there's not a lot of value in video for this because it's mostly a one-way communication. I value the questions coming in, and we have a methodology for it. But if you're sleeping through this presentation, I'm okay with that. But when you have meetings with a team, it isn't okay. So what we found is that when we can use video in our communications, in our daily stand-ups, in our weekly status meetings, that is such an awesome tool. And I highly recommend video as a way to interact. Because what happens is, I've tried to do, remember, I said a few slides ago that I did training at 6 o'clock in the morning because it was remote training. Personally, I hate that kind of training because I miss that interaction with the people. Some of the time when personal interaction is important, video can make up for that. When you have video, you can see, are they sleeping through your presentation? Half of you guys could be sleeping and I would never know. When it's important, I want to know. So I encourage video conversations when it's a critical meeting so that I can judge people's faces. I think I mentioned that I'm going down to California to work with my customer in person. Part of the reason I'm doing that is because they're not really set up for video. If I can get people set up for video, then I don't have to travel. And I can see their faces, and I can see whether they're paying attention, and I can see whether they're involved in the meeting. I have a bullet up here that says, respect the team members' feelings about video. I personally am not video ready when it's 7 o'clock in the morning. So we don't always have video chats at 7 o'clock in the morning because many times I'm just not ready for it. But if it's a critical thing and if it's an important thing, then I'll get ready for it and I'll do it. The other thing is be sensitive about bandwidth issues. Not everybody has awesome internet, and occasionally you can have real problems if you've got too many people doing video, and you can start losing. So be sensitive to it. But I strongly encourage the use of video as a way to get people really engaged in the meeting. The one meeting that that's the worst meeting you can have is when you're talking on the phone and the other end of the room puts you on mute and does something else. So I'll give you a tip. Call on people during the meeting. Ask people questions. If I knew all of your names, I would be saying, hey, what's going on? And I would ask somebody a question as a way of keeping them involved. Video takes the pressure off of you because you can then see. I've been on a meeting. We had a principal consultants meeting a couple weeks ago where I was kind of laughing because one of our principal consultants basically put us on hold, forgot he was on video, and just talked on his phone. And it was work, but it just made me laugh because the whole time we're talking, I can see him talking on his phone. And so it can happen, but it reduces it a lot when you can use video. So one way to, and I think you get a better personal interaction so that you kind of know how people are feeling when you're talking. So my tip is definitely use video where you can. Somebody asked me earlier, how do you manage remote teams over time zones? This is how I do it. Common business hours. We declare at the beginning of the project what the common business hours are. And for those hours, everybody's expected to be there and be available. Now, obviously, if you have a doctor's appointment, you get sick, blah, 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 you're not going to be there. But for example, I have a 4 time zone team right now. And so I have a stat. My hours are actually 7 o'clock Pacific until 2 o'clock Pacific. So 10 a.m. Eastern until 5 p.m. Eastern. I let the Florida team that I work with know, and my East Coast developers, that's when I'm available. And that's when I expect the entire team to be available. If they want to work 10 in the morning until 6 at night on the East Coast, I'm good with that. If they want to work 5 in the morning, that's fine, but I'm expecting them to be available until 5 p.m. at night. And so I establish a common set of business hours for my team, which obviously my team doesn't want to work at 5 in the morning. But one of my developers works from 8 to 4 or 8 to 4:30, and I okayed it saying, that's all right, he's close enough to 5. But my customer works until 5. So we establish these common business hours. And we tell everybody, if you want to set up a meeting, it's got to be between 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. Eastern. They're very good about not. I tell people, don't abuse your West Coast team by scheduling 8 o'clock in the morning meetings. It does happen, but think about it and really be sensitive to the fact that you're screwing with them. Same thing with 7 o'clock meetings. Try really hard not to have a 7 o'clock at night meeting for an Eastern team. Sure, it's 4 o'clock Pacific, but my advice is establish common business hours and stick to them. Get the time that happens outside of common business hours is what I'm calling independent workload. So until 10 o'clock in the morning, my guys work independent. And after 2 o'clock in the afternoon for me, I work on my own. I save things that I do by myself for those times. And that way we have a common set of hours, and then we have the independent hours. I will tell you, you got to be a little flexible on lunch because lunchtime happens. Some people eat early, some people eat late. It's kind of all over the place. But you warn your team, look, I'm sorry, but we have to have this meeting at this time. You need to work around it. That's the trick to working with multiple time zones, is declaring those common business hours. And even if you have a worldwide team, even if it's 1 hour a day, you pick that 1 hour that everybody can meet, and that's what you have to do. I will tell you that we have a couple of teams right now at Pragmatic Works that are working with overseas teams. And we have one consultant who, bless her heart, gets up at 5 o'clock in the morning for one meeting, and then she has another meeting at 7 o'clock at night because she has worldwide people to support. She doesn't work from 5 in the morning till 7 at night, but she has to work at 5 in the morning and at 7 o'clock at night. She said yes to it. That's a better way to put it. Try not to do that to your people, but there are times when something like that, especially if you're a leader, is gonna happen. But the big key, and hopefully this answers that other question on time zones, is common business hours. All right. So I'm going to give you a little bit of personal advice. Have some office hours, work the same time every day. Don't be the guy who just starts working when you get up and you get up at a different, you never set an alarm clock and you just wake up when you wake up. Have a fixed set of office hours. If you were going into an office, you'd have the same scenario most of the time. So pick some office hours and work the same time. Make sure you're limiting your background noise when you're in these meetings. Pay attention to my husband he sits in a different area of the house, but every once in a while he turns his TV up too loud and you can hear it in the background. So I have to tell him, please turn the TV down because it's not my TV that's on. What I recommend is people have a separate area of the house that you go to work. My son-in-law actually he took over a closet in their house and set up a desk. And when he goes in, he puts the busy sign on the outside of the door so that the kids know dad went to work. And the fact that he's not in the same area as everybody else, they respect the fact that he's gone to work. Another tip I'll give you is when you're working from home, and I'm so guilty of this, my Safeway.com delivery will be here soon. Uber Eats, DoorDash, Grubhub, Amazon.com, Safeway.com, all those stores make it real easy for you to shop from home. But don't forget, sometimes it's good to leave the house. That's sort of a big tip I can give you. Don't be the person who works at home so much you never get out of the house and you never have interaction with anybody other than people over the phone. I think it's really important. And I say that because I caught myself last Saturday saying, oh, I need new sheets for my bed. Oh, I can just order them on Amazon.com. And then I think, I have not left the house since Monday. I need to get my butt out of the house. I'm going to drive down to Bed Bath & Beyond instead of shopping at Amazon because I need to get out of the house. Same thing with disconnecting from work. Make sure that every once in a while you disconnect from work. I have worked in the middle of the Serengeti Desert when I was on safari in Africa, and I don't recommend that. It's not a good thing. Make sure to disconnect. When you're not working, you're not working. Doesn't mean you're not going to occasionally have an emergency that you have to deal with, but treat it the same as if you were working in an office. So just from me to you, if you are working on a remote team, don't fall into the trap of thinking that you're working 24 hours a day. I think that even if you get to work with no pants on, it's still important to make it feel like you're working and then you're not working. Probably the biggest thing, I am guilty of this. I have taken my laptop to the bathroom because I didn't want someone to think that I wasn't online. Don't do that. Go to the bathroom. If you avoid that mentality that says if you don't immediately respond, you must be goofing off. That's what happens when you have remote team members. And that's the best way you can irritate them. Well, I just told you 5 minutes ago. Where were you? You know what? If I wasn't at my desk, you'd leave me a note. Do the same thing with a team member. Recognize that people are going to step away from their computer once in a while, and especially with a multi-time zone team. If they're not at their computer, it doesn't mean they're not working. What I do, and the way I make it work with my team, is I say, look, if you're going to be gone more than 10 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes, just put a note in our team's chat room that we all share that says, hey, going to be away from the computer for 5 minutes. Be right back. And then when you come back, say, hey, I'm back. It takes 2 seconds to type that into a chat room. When you do that, you give yourself the ability to encourage them to be offline. I'm going to go through a couple other slides real quick. This is the same thing. My boss told me if you're too sick to go to work, then you're too sick to work. Don't feel like just because you work from home, you have to work when you're sick. The 2 pictures that are up there are examples of me doing that. And it's not a good idea. And I've learned the hard way. If you're too sick to go to work, don't work. Just because you work from home doesn't mean you have to work 24/7. And I think that's really important. We talked a minute ago about, I'm going through these fast because I just realized I'm running out of time. Morale and inclusion. Make sure, this goes to the question that I was just asked a few minutes ago. Make sure everybody feels like a team member. Make sure that start a meeting with a little chit chat. Don't feel like you have to jump into work just because you're not sitting in the same room. Focus on positive feedback. I'll tell you a tip that I did at Microsoft. When I was at Microsoft, we had a remote consulting team. We have all had offices in Redmond, but nobody ever went there. But once about every 6 months, our boss would have a you must come to the office meeting. And every once in a while, she had a get to know each other meeting. We had a what are you passionate about when you're not at work meeting, where everybody could come in and just talk a little bit about themselves and get to know each other. And it was awesome. So don't forget about morale when you have a remote team. I have a salesperson who sent me a $20 Starbucks card. It was awesome. It's a digital thing. She sent me a Starbucks card just to say thanks. And it was so nice because it's, I never see her, I never get, but it was her way of saying thank you. And at Pragmatic Works, we have what we call a shout out app. And so we try to make sure to give shout outs to everybody who's helping, because that's part of keeping morale up. And I think it's even more important on a remote team to keep that morale up. I have a quick slide on technical jargon, which just says, make sure everybody's do the logical things when you have a remote team. Watch out for security, make sure that data access, be very careful with personally identifiable information, that if you have a remote team, they don't have unsecured access to all of that data. That's a real bad thing. Pay attention to it. But this is the most important thing. Here's how you tell if you're running a remote team correctly. It's that you forget about the fact that they're a remote team. My team right now, I forget about the fact that I've never met the guys that are on my team. I've never met them. I wouldn't know them. We've never even video chatted, but I have a strong relationship with the team, and I talk to them all day. Before this meeting, I told them I'm going to be out of touch for an hour. If you need me, email me. And by keeping that interaction going, to me, I don't even think of them as being a remote team. And that's how you know you've done it right. So the wrap up is use the same skills you use for a successful team, focus on communication, focus on well-defined deliverables, participate, and support your team. Any last questions before we run out of time?
We'll give everybody just a second because I haven't seen any new ones come through, but I think this is great not only for dev teams, this is great for any team.
Yeah. I thought about that when I was writing it up because I drafted it as working with a remote Azure development team. But honestly, the way things are today, you might be working on any technology and you might be fulfilling any role. And so I just wanted to get across the things that have worked for us really well in learning to be very remote. And hopefully that's helped people.
Yep. I mean, I'm a marketing person and half of my team is remote. And so I can totally relate to all this.
Yep. All right. Any last questions?
Nope, I think that's it. So Kathy, thank you so much for a great presentation. I'm sure you can see the chat afterwards where everybody seems like they very much enjoyed it. So thank you so much for, almost closing out the day for us with a really good presentation. Thank you.
I think we got one more really good presentation coming.
One more really good presentation, and then people can continue to watch us on recordings for the next year.
Right, that's right. And if you have questions or follow-up comments, you're welcome to send them to me. All right?
Yes, thank you guys so much. We appreciate it. Thank you, Kathy.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.